Star Wars 7x7 episode 1859. Today, we're going to talk about A Crash of Fate. This is the non-spoiler review of Zoraida Cordova's novel, which is a Galaxy's Edge tie-in, and maybe a little bit more. Let's go. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode, and I gotta say, Zoraida Cordova, great job on the first full novel in the Star Wars canon for you. That is, of course, A Crash of Fate. She previously did a short story in From a Certain Point of View, which was, of course, the 40 short story collection retelling the original Star Wars from the points of view of all sorts of minor characters and side folks and whatnot. Anyway, this is her first full novel contribution to the situation, and it ends up, if you read a lot of Star Wars books, you're going to start making comparisons. I mean, there's just no way around it. And so the field in which Zoraida Cordova is playing with this novel is the same field that you have, for example, Beth Revis's Rebel Rising, or Ahsoka by E.K. Johnston, Queen's Shadow for that matter, by E.K. Johnston as well. Also Lost Stars by Claudia Gray, or Ray Carson's Most Wanted. The thing of it is that all of those novels, with the exception of Lost Stars, have known Star Wars characters that they can leverage, right? So already you're going to be invested in the novel because of the fact that it's got characters that you already know and love. Lost Stars didn't have that benefit to work with, and so it's probably the most direct comparison. And even then, it's kind of an apples and oranges thing. I will say that, the main comparison that sparks in my head is the fact that we're talking about main characters that we don't know and that we have to get invested in, also who happen to be star-crossed lovers in their way. You kind of see the similarity, I imagine. And from a scope situation, the Galaxy's Edge thing ties it to Batuu a bit, and so it doesn't necessarily have the same scope as Lost Stars. But again, it ultimately ends up being an apples and oranges comparison because Zoraida Cordova really does a good job with the story and with the believability of the characters and makes a very enjoyable creation out of A Crash of Fate. And similarly to Lost Stars, it all goes on the backs of its main characters that are falling in love with each other, and in the case of A Crash of Fate, it involves Izzy Garci and Jules Ricab, and they, as we know from previous descriptions of the plot, had been separated as kids. They were fast friends growing up on Batuu, and Izzy was spirited away in the middle of the night. The novel tells us why exactly that's the case, and she doesn't necessarily mean to come back to Batuu, but she ends up, via a crash of fate, if you will, back on Batuu and happens to cross paths with Jules again, and the flames are sparked and fanned, as you might imagine. And the novel actually follows Izzy and Jules in alternating chapters as it tells the story chronologically, and it's very well done. I mean, this is a situation where even when they are separated, it still follows a chronological development of the story, and you don't lose the thread of it. There's no having to double back. It's very smoothly told. And because it is done in a certain way, in that third-person omniscient situation, with their two alternating perspectives, you really get into the minds of characters, and you see how the romance develops, how they become connected again, and the emotional depth with which Zoraida Cordova portrays the developing relationship, even though it happens in almost a speed-like fashion, right? It's just very fast and happens over the course of a comparatively short period of time. It is very well executed, very deeply emotionally felt, and very logical, despite it being an emotional thing. Like, you can actually see how it's developing, and it feels like it makes perfect sense. You don't have to be convinced by arm twisting that, will they or won't they end up together. You can see how it's going to develop, and you can feel that it is an honest telling of the story. You also get a sense of the level of shady goings-on happening on Black Spire Outpost, and I hope it's something that you can actually talk to the cast about. I hope this is something that, they brief them on the history of Black Spire Outpost, and so you could actually talk to people and say, oh, hey, remember that time when Izzy and Jules were causing all sorts of foofara around Black Spire? Like, I hope that gets worked into the story that they're able to talk about. I think that would be really cool. And you also get to meet two very prominent marquee characters, if you will, from Black Spire Outpost. And that would be Doc Ondar of the Den of Antiquities and Olga of Olga's Cantina fame. Now, it turns out that she's not just running the cantina. She's actually the local crime lord and wants a piece of every bit of action that's happening in her territory, whether it's her people or people coming from somewhere else like Izzy is coming from. Though I have to say that actually ties into if I had one disappointment about the novel, I would say that I understand why it takes place mostly on Batuu and very much in Black Spire Outpost. I mean, it is a Galaxy's Edge novel, and it's supposed to introduce us to the planet and to that specific location and tie in to the theme park and whatnot. But the novel in its early stages actually gives us a sense of scope in the galaxy when we see Izzy before she returns to Batuu. And as a result, I have to say I felt like I was a little trapped on Batuu in a way. Like, the story gave me moments where I thought the scope was going to be wider, and so I just felt like it was a little bit limited, and I wanted to see them get off Batuu and just have a broader scale of adventures. And unfortunately, didn't get that. But then again, it's not my story to tell. I have to trust that Zoraida Cordova and anyone who was talking to her about, hey, this is what we want to do with this novel, or what we want to see you do with this novel, that's what needed to be done. And so, yeah, it's just my own particular wish that it had had the broader scope, and would have loved to see what she would have done taking folks further afield from Batuu. Ultimately, though, I have to say it was definitely an enjoyable read and really powered by a very realistic relationship between the two characters and some very well thought out character development and romantic development as well. So kudos to Zoraida Cordova for A Crash of Fate. And as far as the deeper details of the novel, well, after the break, I will talk about how we're going to get into those deeper details later this week. Stay tuned. This episode is brought to you by Constant Contact, the premier email marketing solution for small businesses and organizations. I've used their service since 2003, and over the past decade and a half, I've watched them evolve, make the product simpler, more powerful, easy to use, and do everything that they can to help train people to use the product more effectively and for it to work with other forms of marketing like social media, for example. So check out sw7x7.com/email to learn more about Constant Contact and start a free trial. Once again, that is sw7x7.com/email for a free trial. Welcome back. So, tomorrow is the episode where we're going to check out what develops on the Disney investor call today. So today, of course, as you're hearing this episode, it's Tuesday, August 6th, and later today, from when this episode is dropping at least, the second quarter 2019 Disney investor call is happening. Bob Iger, we talked about this back on August 1st show. Bob Iger is going to give a little speech during that webcast, and there is always a chance that he's going to drop some new Star Wars nugget news, and so we'll be covering that on Wednesday's episode of the show. Thursday and Friday, we will dig into some details about the Galaxy's Edge, A Crash of Fate novel, in particular about the First Order and the Resistance, and where this plays in terms of the Star Wars timeline and connections to other Star Wars novels as well. But for now, that's going to do it for this episode of the show. Thank you so much for joining me for it, as always. And may the Force be with you, wherever in the world you may be.
This podcast is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox. It is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other related Star Wars items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2019 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.